Okay, so I'm going to take you through where we left off. A little bit might be review. So we finished with like the lungs. We'll look at the interior of the lungs, which we call the alveoli, where the actual gas exchange happens. So we have a cobweb of capillaries. Remember, capillaries is where gas exchange happens. And we're going to have thin squamous cells. Squamous means flattened cells. Really, they'll be simple squamous. They'll be a single layer of thin flattened cells. And down there, we have our oxygen being put into the blood and carbon dioxide being released into the outside air. We also have these things called macrophages. And those are part of our immune system where they're going to break down or they're going to kill bacteria and viruses that come into our respiratory system before they infect us. Just a little look at what happens when we come out of the womb. When you're inside the womb, you're getting oxygen from the mom, but we actually start to release, and the mom causes a release of what we call surfactant, which is a chemical, and that will lower the surface tension, which just means the lungs will not stick to each other, and it'll be able to release. If you think about putting two wet things next to each other, they usually stick to each other, but the surfactant causes that tension to be released, and your lungs will open up. As long as the baby is about 30 weeks along, anything younger than that, their lungs won't be able to open on their own, and they'll probably be on a respirator for the time being to do most of their breathing. We'll look at the physiology of the respiratory system briefly, but we talked about it in class already. We have inspiration, which means to breathe in. Remember, you have two main muscle groups here. You have what's called the diaphragm, and you have the intercostals. So when our diaphragm contracts, which means it's really going to pull down, it's going to cause air to follow it due to what we call a negative pressure. So if we look here, the atmospheric pressure is 760. When our diaphragm contracts downward, it's going to be 758, which means your air is going to want to rush inward. All right, your intercostals, remember, they're going to contract and pull the rib cage up and out of the way, and that's to make room for those lungs to expand. Here's another look, 760, 758, air is going to want to come in due to that diaphragm contracting. When we want to exhale, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to relax the diaphragm, and the air is going to be pushed out of our airway. Simultaneously, your intercostals will relax, and that will cause even more pressure on your thoracic cage. So you'll go from, if we go back one slide, exhaling, you'll go from 762 inside, because the diaphragm is relaxing, that's going to force air outwards. Okay, so inhaling, exhaling, it's just the opposites as to where the negative or lower pressure is. That's the way that air is going to want to go. Okay. If we look at volumes, we have a couple main volume capacities that we're going to be looking at. One is called your tidal volume, which is right here. A tidal volume just means your average breathing in and breathing out. You move about 500 milliliters of air every time you breathe. So it's this small little wave-like, and most people just breathe in, breathe out quite normally. If I told you to take a real deep breath in, you would have the inhale of your tidal volume, but then you're looking at your inspiratory reserve, which means from the top of a normal breath, which is here, all the way up till you can fill your lungs to a maximum. Okay, that's called your inspiratory reserve, and that's quite a big number that you can fill your lungs up with. And the more you work out, or you can even do breathing exercises, the more that inspiratory reserve will go up. If we look on the other side of our tidal volume, remember here's tidal volume right here. Okay, we have what's called your expiratory reserve. Let's just erase this. So your expiratory reserve means when you get to the bottom of a regular breath, you can actually force out, you can actually force out more air than you're normally used to. All right, and this would come out like if you got hitting the stomach. Usually a lot of that air gets forced out just from the blow that you have. And then lastly, you have what's called residual volume on this slide. Residual volume is air that you cannot get out of your lungs. Okay, it's constantly there. And the reason for that is because we can't crush our thoracic cage on itself, right? We have our ribs there. And second of all, if we let all the air out of our lungs would want to maybe stick together. So we want to make sure there's always air inside of our lungs, so that wouldn't happen. But mostly it's because our thoracic cage can't compress anymore. We can't produce any more pressure inside of our thoracic cavity to get the rest of that air out. The last thing is what we call vital capacity, and there you're going to add your inspiratory reserve, your tidal volume, and your expiratory reserve together. Okay, you can see here we have what's called inspiratory capacity. We don't really have to worry about that. That's just adding tidal volume and inspiratory reserve together. But most importantly, we're looking at vital capacity. We're looking at expiratory reserve, tidal volume, and inspiratory reserve for this. Okay, so just to finish up here, residual volume never comes out of your lungs, and then you have your 4 other main volumes that we look at. I hope this helps, and I'll see you soon.